Hi, everyone. As I get set up. All right. Let's do a little sharing. I apologize for being late. But if you've been here before, where are my headphones? Duh. Okay, there we are. All right. Is anyone here? 3 or 5 people. Let me share this on Instagram. Hope you guys had a wonderful Christmas. If you're here, the 5 of you that are here so far, if I do a podcast, do you like me to jump in to the subject matter immediately and do a catch-up session at the end? Or do you prefer your catch-up session in the beginning with the subject matter to then follow? Just a little question for the class. I'm going to do this podcast a little differently than the ones as of late. And I intend to do really kind of a subject matter on defragmenting reality, CERN, and the Mandela effect. And I will tell you why in 1 second. Because it's hard for me to multitask and share all of this shit. But hi, how are you? Missed you. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas. All right, sharing it to the Telegram. Okay, where are my notes? Cheers. Is anyone drinking tonight? Having a little beer? All right, I need to set a couple more things up on my end. I know I can do my own thing, but I like to hear what you like, you know? I aim to please. And, oh, what did you just do, damn it? I don't know. You know, I got that going. I don't know. I like to hear what the people like. All right. Slim pickings tonight. I guess a lot of people might be doing family stuff. Okay. Are we ready? Welcome back. It's episode 105 of the mymaria777 podcast. And tonight, I want to talk about defragmenting reality. I want to talk about CERN. I want to talk about the Mandela effect. That is definitely going to be the theme and the subject matter for this podcast. If you know me and if you've ever listened to anything I've done before, you know that I am ADD as fuck. And so I am sure we will go down a plethora of rabbit holes tonight. But I was just having this whole kind of thought process today as I was driving back to Nashville from my Christmas vacation. And I got to this place where I was answering questions on my stories, and somebody asked something like, how do you do it? How do you not like go crazy in this 3D world? And as I went to answer this, I'm always thinking about like what kind of visual can I put on my stories or something like that for you. And I'm always normally thinking of like a movie or TV reference. And so I thought to myself, as I was thinking of like what my answer would be, is obviously like, we're all mad here. Like you might think that like I'm handling all of this well, but I'm really not. And I'm just as crazy as everyone else is feeling. So I thought to myself, like, oh, wouldn't it be lovely to put in like the Alice in Wonderland scene where the Cheshire Cat says, we're all mad here. But oh, wait, that's a Mandela effect because that doesn't exist in this timeline. And he didn't say that in that scene. He says, shit, Maria, you should know this. I literally just posted this today. But again, I don't come from this timeline. So I am unsure what they truly said. Okay. Cheshire Cat says most everyone is mad here. And I distinctly recall the scene in which the Cheshire Cat says, we're all mad here. And so I say all of this to you in my story, and then I go and I decide to like redo this post. It was something I discovered back in February of 2022 this year. I had made a post about it on my previous account, the Oracle, my backup account. That one got taken down a couple months ago. So I start to like recreate this post, get my mindset back in it again, getting my stuff together, and I post it, and I can immediately see the comments come in that just can't fathom the concept of the Mandela effect. And I always have to like put this like disclaimer at the bottom of these type of posts saying like, hey guys, as a gentle reminder, this isn't about like you being wrong, me being right and you being wrong, or vice versa. It should be like this fascinating discussion about how there are groups of people that have collective memories that like wouldn't place bets that like what they remember is real, and it's just really not. And so like instead of getting at each other's throats about it, like can't we just talk about that fascinating discussion? I always put this little like disclaimer in there. And I get a lot of comments at times about how you're just misremembering, and a lot of them almost seem to be like grammatical, not necessarily errors, but grammatical differences, like very subtle, not so subtle differences or changes in the word usage, if you will. So, as I was thinking about that, I have this theory when I talk about timelines. And so I'm going to kind of breeze. I'm going to give you like a quick overview of this now, and then we'll talk about it much more in depth as we go into CERN. But sometimes I like to compare when I'm talking about string theory and I'm trying to like illustrate it in like a visual context. I often talk about how timelines, like if I thought of timelines as like pancakes or like very small mandolin slices, and let's just think of them as like flat discs, not going into like a flat earth discussion, but just that like a timeline looks like that. And if you had this grand stack of pancakes, this stack of timelines, a string could connect one particle 100 timelines up and through all of them to another particle, trying to illustrate the concept of string theory a little bit. But I've also theorized before that, like, what if it was possible, you've got 100 timelines here. Could they be flattened in some way? Could they be combined in some way? And through that flattening, that convergence, that combination, timelines begin to like converge and lay on top of each other. And perhaps that's why we have these differences, these Mandela effects. Now, I also talk about at times, and I'm just trying to kind of give you some visuals as I set you up for the concept that I would like to talk about. If the multiverse exists, if multiple timelines exist, if there is the possibility that for every action, there's kind of a reaction, or for every time that you decide to go left, there is a timeline in which you decided to go right. If that's true. And if you were to, sometimes I visualize like the multiverse as a tree. And this big, thick tree comes down into the ground. And then you have this like very complex, crazy root system. And the roots just break off and break off and branch and branch. And there's so many roots. And they are very similar in nature. They're next to each other. They go down, but they're not the same, obviously. And then sometimes, depending on the manner in which the tree is contained, you find those roots kind of come back together, if you will, in that kind of visualization. So sometimes I like to think of timelines like that, like that this is the tree of time, and then it branches into these roots of timelines. And then if the container perhaps causes the timelines to come back together, they could combine or converge in some way. So it's so crazy and complex to think about, that just even in my own individual universe, there's an infinite number of timelines based on all of the decisions I make and don't make. Within each of your current timeline is an infinite number of timelines based on all the actions there. So all of that, thinking about also reality existing in a computer simulation. And again, not something that we can even truly fathom if it is true, but I was thinking about the sim, and I was thinking about all of these timelines, and I was thinking about the Mandela effect. And for a great deal, like so many timelines would be statistically nearly similar, like 99.99999% similar. So many for me, so many for you, so many in general, that there's just these like minute, acute changes. And if we did exist in a computer simulation, then wouldn't there be times in which the sim experienced a lag, or times in which the server was overloaded and it began buffering in some way? And wouldn't there come a time in which you might need to defragment the disk? Okay, so this takes me back to like Windows 1995. We had a computer when I was very like a decently young age as a kid. I grew up on the internet, child of the internet. We talk about that often. So I'm very familiar in the times in which I had to defragment the computer. And I have literally, you say the word defrag, and I immediately go back to that like Windows 1995 visual where it talks about the space, it talks about what it needs to clean up. Like, this is the way that it looks here on the top bar with all the different colors. This is the way it's going to look here on the second bar after the defrag is complete. I would do the defrag, and my parents thought I was so fucking smart figuring out cleaning up the computer in this way. But all I was doing was a little defrag. And then I thought to myself, what if God, the creator, the architects, the person outside of the simulation, whomever that is to you, what if from time to time the server has to be defragmented? And when the defragmentation occurs, all of these pancakes get flattened down into one. So then I was thinking about the Mandela effect, okay? Obviously, it is a psyop, and I'm going to come back and talk about that more here in a second. But shit. Pancakes. Okay. A great deal of some of these minute Mandela effects are grammatical in nature. For example, there is the group of people that remember in the magic mirror of it all and the mirror of it all. I remember mirror mirror. Mirror mirror does not exist in this timeline. Magic mirror does. But if I am the individual who wrote magic mirror, who wrote mirror mirror, isn't that one of those moments where you make that decision and it branches off into two different huge branches of the timeline? I don't know. I just wondered, like, if the server is being defragmented and all of these timelines that are statistically similar are being converged, and magic mirror versus mirror mirror was just a decision that one individual made one day. I don't know. Does this make sense to anyone? Like, obviously there are big Mandela effects, and I don't think that I'm not trying to like downgrade it at all. I don't know. Just the concept of these like minor changes made me think about defragmentation and made me consider whether or not sometimes Mandela effects occur. Obviously, because they're messing with the timeline, they're time traveling, they're Project Looking Glass, they're manipulating multiple timeline, they're manipulating the space-time continuum, in my opinion. And that has a variety, a plethora of consequences, ones in which we cannot probably fathom or conceptualize. But I just wonder if some of the Mandela effects are not as intentional and kind of like a byproduct of all of this. Okay. I have not watched, somebody asked this real quick. Oh, by the way, if you're listening to this in the future, this is a live podcast. It's December 27th. And so from time to time, I will reference some of the chats, but I will try to make this primarily something that is not just, oh my God, it's a live podcast later in time, just a true podcast that we have some live elements involved. Archaics is something that people were asking me whether or not I've listened to him, and I have not, but I should, is what it sounds like. I have also not seen the show. I've seen part of Dark. I've seen some episodes, but I was in one of those moods where I wasn't completely paying attention, and you really need to pay attention, especially because of the language difference. So I need to rewatch Dark. Anyways, okay. We talk about the Mandela effect, we talk about CERN, we talk about timelines, and I just thought that perhaps this was one of those nights, those podcasts, where we could kind of go over everything and talk about it from like our current level of the psyop. And so I basically gave you kind of like the conclusion, and now we're going to come back around and go all the way through it. Here's a little law school tip. When we're in law school, we learn how to do legal writing. We do something called IRAC. IRAC stands for issue, rule, application, and conclusion. And so this is most of the time, like when I talk about something or I'm presenting something to you guys, it really all kind of falls back on IRAC. So normally, like, you're introducing your issue, you're going to go ahead and tell the individual like what your conclusion is, which is kind of what I was just doing with you guys right now. You're going to explain what the rule is. This is all law, obviously, but like whatever argument that you were trying to make, what your rule is, you would apply it to your situation, apply the rule to the situation, and then you would eventually conclude. So it's a little first year legal writing for you, 101. But what is the Mandela effect. What does it mean? How is it connected to Nelson Mandela? It's a term that was coined by this individual named Fiona Broome, who I didn't write exactly. I think she's some sort of conspiracy theorist, if you will. Anybody in the chat can Google her and remind me what her connection is. She's some sort of writer. And so she has some sort of experience where she's talking to other individuals, and she is one of us. But anyways, hold on, let me back up. She's having this conversation with some individuals, and they're talking about Nelson Mandela. She is like one of us, and she believed, or excuse me, she had this memory of Mandela dying in prison in like the late 80s, early 90s. She's talking to a group of individuals who recall that he died in 2013/2014. I saw 2 different dates on that, but it's around that time. And so she eventually, like through her writing, coins the term the Mandela effect. And so it describes kind of like the idea that there are groups of people in the world who collectively have different memories of the same subject matter. So I don't know about you. Obviously, like Nelson Mandela pre-Mandela effect was like not a huge individual on my timeline per se. But if we had been at trivia, if we had been drinking and you had asked me, hey, Maria, did Mandela die in 2013, 2014? I would say no fucking way. He died in prison back in the 80s, the early 90s. And then if we were to then like bet on it, like this might be one of those times where I jokingly would be like, oh yeah, I bet my life on it, I bet my mom on it, I bet my dog on it. Like, yes, this is what I recall. And that just ain't the way that it happened in this timeline. And so what Fiona found so interesting, what I find so interesting is that collectively, like not through some sort of this wasn't discovered at a time in which social media was huge per se in the way that it is now. So it's not, I guess this leads me to like another rabbit hole, one in which I don't want to waste a ton of time on. But what I find so interesting, pre-social media, pre-cell phones, pre any type of like mass communication, how was it that there were certain things that just permeated all of us collectively at the same time and kind of age range? For example, why did all of us believe that Marilyn Manson had some of his ribs removed so that he could suck his own dick? You know, like that's not something that they're necessarily saying on MTV. Like, how did we all know that? Like, how did we all share like Bloody Mary stories, you know, that she's gonna like appear in your window? Like, obviously, they're old wives' tales. Obviously, they're conspiracy theories, but I guess like I did this once before where I talked about like the Marilyn Manson thing, and of my like thousands of followers, people were like, I heard about this at this age, in this part of the country. I heard about it in this part of the country. Like it was all over the United States. And then there were people that were like, oh, yeah. I heard this in Europe. I heard this. There was some very obscure country that was like, oh, yes, this was a rumor back in the day that I heard too. And like, if you want to get into a discussion on quicksand, on spontaneous combustion, on like there are certain things I think that like trickled down through the type of media that we consumed as kids, and like maybe that's why we all have these kind of collective memories in the same way. Maybe it's the Tartaria of it all. But I just find it interesting, like the collective conscious and how there are some things that we all just seemed to know pre-mass communication, pre-access to information. But Fiona Broome goes on to say, opponents of Fiona Broome go on to say that the Mandela effect is not novel, it's not denotative of an alternative reality, that it's more confabulation. And confabulation being a memory error defined as the production of fabricated, distorted, or misinterpreted memories about oneself or the world. It is generally associated with certain types of brain damage, especially an aneurysm, or a specific subset of dementia. While still an area of ongoing research, the basal forebrain is implicated in the phenomenon of confabulation. People who confabulate present with incorrect memories ranging from subtle inaccuracies to surreal fabrications and may include confusion or distortion in the temporal framing, time sequence, or duration of memories. In general, they are very confident about their recollections, even when challenged with contradictory evidence. Confabulation. I do find that's obviously a psychological premise that exists. I don't find it to be the just answer to every single kind of distinct, like I'm the first, like I am, if you present me with a Mandela effect, I normally remember the one that doesn't exist. Is that because I am the way that I am? I came the way that I came. I think the way that I do. I don't know. Am I literally picking like the wrong answer every time intentionally just to like have a position like that? No. I don't bullshit like that. I find no reason to lie about it. And there are a couple that like don't follow that premise, but I just don't see confabulation being the answer to all of this, especially like it's one thing for me to have confabulation about certain things or certain memories on an individual basis in my individual timeline, but to think that there's like a collective confabulation, like obviously I think that social media probably ropes people in on like a bandwagon type situation that might not have before. So not to say that it doesn't exist entirely, but me, Maria, on a personal basis, no. Like I do not find my thoughts and my differences on what I find to be different in this reality for me to be confabulation at all. For example, I did a great deal of babysitting growing up. I did a great deal of like nannying, and I used to nanny in college. And my sweet little girl that I still love and see all the time, who's now 16, isn't that crazy? We used to watch the Berenstain Bears. Her parents were very particular about what she was allowed to consume television wise, and the Berenstain Bears were one of the things that I would watch with her, and I detested the Berenstain Bears. It was the worst. I hated it. I like it was just ugh, but it was a little time for me to play on my phone, let's be real. Now, in the timeline that I come from, it is Berenstein, Stein. If it had been Berenstain, Stain, as it exists in this current timeline in which we are in, let me tell you that there would have been like so many, like I wasn't a meme queen back then, but I would have been thinking about like funny things I could say about Berenstain, like there's a stain on cartooning, there's a stain on this, like it just would have been distinct and I wouldn't have liked it because I don't know if anybody else thinks about stuff like this, but it just wouldn't have been even for me, even though I think there would be three E's in the way that I recall it, and that wouldn't be an even number. But I would have wanted on like a me weird, I don't know if this is autistic of me or not. I would have wanted the E's to all be the same. Like the A would have been out of line and I wanted the E's to be even. And that would have really bothered me. So there's no fluffing way that I'm confabulating. There's no fluffing way that I confabulated this because this is one of those times I would bet the house, the dog, the everything I got on Berenstein. And yet I live in a fucking existence of Berenstain. Okay. Now you know kind of this idea of the Mandela effect. It's a term used to explain something that a group of people remember one way and a group of people remember another way. People in the chat have brought up, obviously, we just talked about Berenstain Bears. Just curious, George, does he have a tail or not? Pikachu, is there two black kind of chevron marks on Pikachu's tail, or is it just all yellow? I could pull up a whole list of them here in a second. But one of the ways that people connect the Mandela effect to CERN is through a video that they put out on YouTube 8 years ago. Now, let me, I guess, just give you a little blip on CERN. There are a number of colliders that exist in the entire world. I almost think it's somewhat psyop-y that we only talk about CERN and we do not talk about like the rest of them that exist. But CERN is the largest collider, and the LHC is there, affectionately known as the Large Hadron Collider. It cost appropriately $4.7 billion to make. It is circular in nature, and it is located 574 feet. So, I got a 47 thing. 574 feet below the ground, and it hugs the French-Switzerland border, the France and Switzerland border near Geneva. All the way around, it is 17 miles circular in nature. And it is basically a tunnel, 574 feet deep. And they collide particles there. That's what they tell us. Obviously, I think they do a great deal of things. I think they're trying to open portals in very much a OA type of way. But let's see. I took some notes kind of everywhere. Okay. CERN and the Large Hadron Collider experiments began publicly in 2008. And that's going to be important here when we go back and I talk about this video on YouTube. But it's also important to note that the first particle accelerator at CERN started back in 1957. CERN detected antimatter for the first time in 1965. There were collisions of matter and antimatter back in 1981. The W and Z particles were discovered in 1983, which then the thing I was reading at the time just also wanted to note that the world's first website and server happened then in 1990. And so the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, begins at CERN in 2008, even though they were constructing it for a great deal of time. I want to say at least like 10 or 15 years. So 8 years ago would have been 2014. I believe Fiona Broome comes up with the Mandela effect, that term, either in like, I'm going to have to look this up because I guess it's kind of germane to the discussion. Sorry, guys. Hold on. Fiona Broome. Mandela. When did she come up with this? Okay, maybe 2017-ish. Anyways, the point being that CERN, the facility, has its own YouTube account. Fiona Broome comes up with the term Nelson. What is with my fucking twang? Whatever voice is coming out tonight. I like to talk in a bunch of different voices. Not to say that I'm hearing voices, I just have different voices. I don't know who's coming out tonight. Sorry about that, y'all. Anyways, Fiona Broom coins Nelson Mandela in sometime in 2017 or thereafter. CERN comes out with this video in 2014. That's just this important distinction I want to make in time, okay? John Ellis is a scientist. John Ellis came up with the theory of everything, all right? John Ellis is in, what is happening with my hair? John Ellis is in this CERN video. And so they're doing a spin on the song Happy, I think by Pharrell. And they're going through all of these people at CERN and they're being funny and smiling and dancing and saying they're happy. They go to John Ellis's office and he's sitting there and it's this like wide angle shot of him and he has two signs on and very much like a sandwich board type way. They're not as large as a sandwich board, but like I want to say, I mean, this is like an 8.5. No, this is larger than that. This might be a legal sized piece of paper. And each of these signs, if you're on YouTube watching this, if you're not, you should be. Help me make some money. Each of them is like this big. So this is one sign, and there's another right below it, okay? The first sign says bond number 1. All right? And the second sign says Mandela. Now, oh, John Ellis, whatever does this mean? Well, if you go back and you're familiar with 007 and you know that the first Bond, I think, actually came out on television, his name was Barry Nelson. Okay, Bond number 1 is Barry Nelson. So you have John Ellis, a scientist in 2014, 3 years before the term Nelson Mandela had been, 3 years before the Mandela effect had been coined. 3 years before, he wears a sign on the CERN YouTube page that says Bond number 1, which means Nelson, and the second sign that says Mandela, Nelson Mandela, for the Mandela effect that is then coined 3 years thereafter. This is just crazy for me. Now, he's known to have like done this before, kind of like put some Easter eggs in some stuff he's done before. And I actually saw in this article that I was looking at that like at some time, I don't know where it came from, he had done some sort of like, he was writing on a chalkboard. It was another picture of him in his office. And on his chalkboard, it had said that inflation is a lie. And all these people were like, what does it mean? Inflation. Of course, inflation is a lie. Everything's a fucking lie because everything is manufactured. But I then saw somebody say that this was really a reference to cosmological inflation, which I found to be fascinating. And so in physical cosmology, cosmic inflation is a theory of exponential expansion of space in the early universe. Now, I'm not trying to get into like that type of physics discussion because there was like a whole like pages and pages of stuff on that about why people disagreed with that or didn't disagree with that. But those are just some Easter eggs he's done before. Talking about inflation, you thinking it's about monetary inflation. It's really about cosmological inflation. And anyways, back to John Ellis. Okay. Nelson Mandela, Bond number 1, Mandela. Why? If the Mandela effect is a psychological phenomenon, okay, if it's all fake, if we're misremembering, if this is confabulation, if we're all a bunch of fucking schizophrenic, autistic fucks, okay, I'll give whomever's watching this, if you've made it this far and you don't like it, I'll give that to you. If it's a psychological phenomenon, why the popularity of the meme? Why the recognition? Why the dissemination of it all? Why is someone so prominent as John Ellis participating in this type of fakery? You know, like if the Mandela effect is just a psychological phenomenon, why is the meme magic the natural organic response. Is the Mandela effect, as it's known and disseminated, a piece of psychological hold on. These are my notes. I'm trying to now make it into oral form. But is the Mandela effect, as we know it and as it's disseminated currently, is this a piece of psychological warfare that is aimed at covering up some sort of other phenomenon that is unrealized by those distracted by the Mandela effect? If it's this big piece of fucking fakery, if it's a never-ending rabbit hole, then why the John Ellis participation in it? And why the John Ellis participation in it 3 years before it's even fucking created? Eventually I'm going to lead you down a Barron Trump omnibus discussion, and I'm not going to get into that whole discussion tonight because I need to re-up on it and be fresh as fucking ready to go. But I'm going to lead you to that water and then we'll drink it later. But is this evidence of a manipulation of the timeline? If we have to stop thinking of time being linear and everything is happening at one time. So did we realize Project Looking Glass? Did we realize time travel and John Ellis is now fucking with us in that type of way, is in that wink sort of way? Or back to my last question, if this is just a psyop, if this is just some sort of psychological phenomenon, why the obsession with it? Why the meme magic? Why participate in this? Wouldn't the scientists working at CERN, the largest fucking particle accelerator in the world, capable of finding antimatter, colliding antimatter, perhaps opening an actual tear in the space-time continuum, would you give a fuck enough to just throw this piece out into the world and participate in this what I would, as the scientist, would consider perhaps low level kind of interaction? But even then, how do you know you're participating in something in 2014 that hasn't been coined until 2017? Okay. That's the first page of notes. Royce Melbourne says this, and I just want to reiterate this for sure. And I like to say this a lot. I like to view things in varying levels of the psyop. And he says we should all keep in mind that there are layers of this psyop, and we want to give loose to certain ideas for sure. Most definitely. But I found this to be very fascinating, and I wanted to talk about it in all sorts of different ways. Okay. Are you guys familiar with John, is it Titor, or I guess it's not Tit, probably. John Titor was a time-traveling internet savant who might be a hoax, but he made CERN predictions, okay? I don't have my John Titor summary here, but I guess, damn it, Maria, let's pull something up real quick. John Titor and his handle of time travel _0 are pseudonyms used on the Time Travel Institute and Art Bell's post-to-post forums during 2000 and 2001 by a poster claiming to be an American military time traveler from 2036. Titor made numerous vague and specific predictions regarding calamitous events in 2004 and beyond, including a nuclear war. Inconsistencies in his explanations, the uniform inaccuracy of his predictions, and a private investigator's findings all led to a general impression that the entire episode was a very elaborate hoax. A 2009 investigation concluded that Titor was likely the creator of Larry Haber, a Florida entertainment lawyer, along with his brother Maury, a computer scientist. Okay. So John Titor is supposed to be a time-traveling internet savant. All right. Let's just say that he is a hoax. All right. And let's just say that he's not the time traveler that we think he was. Let's talk about some conversations, though, that he had on these forums back in 2000 and 2001. So again, let's go over our timeline. Particle colliders exist. Antimatter has been found. There have been collisions. However, there's not a great deal known about CERN in 2000. They are building it, but it is not the Large Hadron Collider. They have not found the Higgs boson particle. They have not found like the God particle, all this stuff, okay? So 2000, 2001, John Titor says this. I'm going to read some of, this is the actual text, okay? CERN, says CERN. CERN will discover some very odd things as a result of their high energy experiments in about a year from your point of view. And then he says, in Geneva, they will accidentally create micro singularities, which will evaporate very quickly and create a massive amount of X-ray and gamma rays. It will puzzle them for a while until they figure out how to add an electrical charge and capture these strange, odd, and massive particles in a magnetic field. Somebody asked him, they shoot electrons at the speed of light, see what they bust up into. And John Titor said, yes. If you bombard a singularity with electrons, you can alter the size of its event horizon and thus its gravitational field. By overlapping these fields from two singularities, you can travel forward and backward through time. So again, let's just pretend that this motherfucker is a hoax. He predicts that CERN would be discovering something related to multiple universes and time travel back in 2000 and 2001. He makes predictions on alternate realities. He makes predictions that seem impossible and improbable at the time. I also want to note that Nostradamus made the following prediction that could be relative to CERN. Quote, leave Geneva, every last one of you. Saturn will be converted from gold to iron. Repose will exterminate all who oppose him. Before the coming, the sky will show signs. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. Leave Geneva, every last one of you, which is obviously where CERN is located. Saturn will be converted from gold to iron. I don't know what account this was on. This is probably on the Oracle, which now no longer exists, but I did a really cool dig where I found back, and like the internet has basically been scrubbed of this information. The only way that I was like Googling and like searching stuff about CERN and gold, and I found it on these blogs of like people who sell in precious metals and gold. And they were talking about how CERN was creating gold. Damn, I don't even know if I ever did this post now that I think about it. I think I did a lot of research on it and held off. I'm not sure. Back in like 2014-ish time, CERN discovered that like and I don't have this pulled up, so I apologize. I'll have to talk about this at another time. But whatever like product is like left over when they do something like within the equipment itself, gold isotopes are being created. Like they essentially had to like shut it down at one point to remove like tons and tons of gold particles that had been created as a result of the experimentations that were being done at CERN. And so like in the alchemy of it all, that like all we've heard for like centuries upon centuries is about like alchemy and the quest to turn things into gold. And like, oh, hey, by the way, CERN is creating gold when it's doing its experimentation. It was just fascinating that nobody talked about it. And it seemed as though it had been scrubbed from the internet, but for these blogs that were talking about, like, look at this fascinating discovery at CERN. Is this going to disrupt our market at all? And it was like that was the only place where they forgot to scrub the internet. Just really interesting. So just this line from Saturn will be converted from gold to iron, I just thought was really interesting in my like gold studying of it all. Now, in like the very front of CERN is the Shiva statue. And there's a whole thing that we could get into that I'm not really prepared to talk about right now, but like in one of the CERN videos that they've made, you see the Shiva statue. There's some like undercover footage where supposedly they were doing some like weird rituals to Shiva in the middle of the night. So what I find interesting is like Shiva is known as the destroyer of worlds. And in Vedic astrology, Shiva is said to be represented by Saturn. So we go back to Nostradamus. Saturn will be converted from gold to iron. Now, Saturn, like, probably go to Nick Hinton, search at Nick Hinton in Twitter plus Saturn Time Cube, and he's got some fascinating discussions about Saturn and Kronos and like the Saturn time cube on Saturn itself and how it could literally be controlling the world that we live in, but like also how our phones are like the black cube of Saturn. Anyways, Saturn itself, though, in ancient times was known as Kronos, the keeper of time. And in the Hindu tradition, it is Shiva who personifies this function. And upon comparison, it becomes very apparent that many of the attributes ascribed to Kronos are also those associated with Shiva. Shiva can easily be identified as the god of time by merely noticing that his drum, the Damaru, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is the shape of an hourglass. And the crescent moon on his brow reveals his association with the feminine principle in nature, as well as with the sickle, which cuts eternity into hours and yet becomes a tool in the hands of the good gardener. The good gardener is the one who helps you obtain release from the shackles of illusion and the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Also, the Babylonian astronomers recorded the movements of Saturn, and it was worshipped by the Romans as the god Saturn or Kronos. So to know that like in astrology, Shiva is said to be represented by Saturn. Saturn is Kronos, the god of time. Shiva could also be the god of time. And we're here at CERN manipulating time and the space-time continuum. Just some like connections I wanted to make in this discussion. Now, opening the door, 1 year after CERN's grand opening. So this would have been in 2009. Sergio Bertolucci, the former director for research and scientific computing of the CERN facility, grabbed headlines when he told a British tabloid that the super collider could open otherworldly doors to another dimension for, this is the quote, a very tiny lapse of time, mere fractions of a second. However, that may just be enough to, quote, to peer into this open door, either by getting something out of it or sending something into it. And Bertolucci then goes on to say, of course, after this tiny moment, the door would again shut, bringing us back to our quote unquote normal four-dimensional world. It would be a major leap in our vision of nature, and of course, there would be no risk to the stability of the world. Now, what if that's just literally not true, though, at all? And these very small changes that they're making to time risk the entire stability of this world. CERN's curious choice of geographic location is something I also wanted to mention here, that like on top of all the speculation as to what CERN scientists are really attempting to do with the Large Hadron Collider, many observers could not help but notice that the town in France where CERN is partially situated is called the Saint Genus Puelli. The name Puali, I guess, comes from the Latin Apolliacum, which is believed that in Roman times a temple existed in honor of Apollo. and the people who lived there believed that it was a gateway to the underworld. So this area right there, right where CERN is now built, was believed to be a temple that existed in honor of Apollo, and the people who lived there at that time believed that that temple to Apollo was a gateway to the underworld, and CERN was built in that same spot. I did not know that until I just read this to you at this very moment. So that's interesting. Really, really interesting. Okay. Second page of notes. We are done. So, who truly knows what they're doing at CERN, what they're going to accomplish at CERN? I think I might sneeze here in a second. Hold on. Let's take a little moment right now of time for ourselves. Taking a sip of my beer. There's a really cool thing I wanted to read to you. Hold on. Damn, where did she go? I'm gonna have to find this in a second, but sometimes we wonder if they are time traveling. Sometimes we wonder if they are making changes to the timeline. Oh, here's my reference. Okay. We'll come to that in a second. I'm sorry. Both of these things, like the time travel, because like it either could be time travel or making changes to the timeline, but like any time travel thereafter in theory would make changes to the timeline, which brings me to the idea of like the Barron Trump omnibus, and whether or not, if everything is happening at one time, did we acquire the ability to have Project Looking Glass? And Project Looking Glass allowed the faction, like, I don't necessarily want to call it like the Trump faction, but it has like to be like the faction in which Trump is a part of or not, to go back and like lay these breadcrumbs for us to then come back and look to. Like, is this like the very actual example of future proofs past? Anyways, as it relates, I find Project Looking Glass to be fascinating, and another podcast that we should do as we tie into the Barron Trump omnibus. But for me, it's very hard for me to like conceptualize and visualize how Project Looking Glass works. So like it takes me to a place where I think about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, like the old school one with kind of like the young kid who is obsessed with television and how like they see him on the TV. So I just wonder how Project Looking Glass works and how you can visualize the differences. It always takes me to a place. I saw this theory once. I know I did not make this up, but I talk about it often. Like I don't know if space is real. Space could be an ocean, but let's just pretend that you had the ability to like put a mirror in space, like a series of mirrors in space, or the ocean that is space, whatever space may be. And then you could tilt the mirrors in such a way that, in the concept of relativity and like time or light years and stuff like that, that like once the light hit it, like you could see into the future or the past based on the angle of the mirror. So sometimes I wondered if Project Looking Glass was something like that. I just always wonder how they visualize what's occurring, and then like, is it almost, is Project Looking, like, I've also considered this, like, could Project Looking Glass get to a certain point that it's basically like the most advanced artificial intelligence that exists, where because I wonder in like the Project Looking Glass of it all, like, how do you manipulate a variable to see how it would change the timeline? So I talk often about Tyler and how there is a version of you in Tyler that knows you better than you know yourself, and it can run all these algorithms on you. So do they just have this complex matrix set up of existence, and then based on a manipulation of certain variables, it outputs the most likely, like, what could occur? I don't know. If anybody could give me a good visual of what, like, because I've seen the like supposed, like, they're not real blueprints, but they're kind of blueprint-esque, talking about like Project Looking Glass is supposed to be on the S4 level of Area 51, and Dan Burrish and people like that have described what it's like and how things kind of look, but it's not a great deal of discussion on how it works and how the user would interact with it. Like, Project Looking Glass discussion obviously goes into a yellow cube discussion, if you're familiar with that. And Dan Burrish talks about the yellow cube and how the yellow cube was more of something that was a disc, yellow cube obviously being a connection to the yellow book, but that the yellow cube would interact with you on an individual basis, and you would have to be able to like control your emotions to control it, and it would show you what the outcome was. There's a whole theory that goes that the reason why Q used to say that about Hillary, that they never thought she would lose, is because Hillary had a yellow cube, and the yellow cube in every hypothetical showed her that she was winning the election, which just gets into another whole fascinating discussion on the Barron Trump omnibus and the last president. And did they go back and manipulate the timeline? Like, how did the yellow cube tell her one thing and something else happened? Again, we view the world through varying levels of the psyop. One day it's a red pill romantic, the next day it's a black pill pragmatist. But the Trump, like, I believe that they're all on the same team, two sides of the same coin. But if you were to strip that away and take a very like red pill romantic view of the psyop and talk about Hillary and the yellow cube and aliens and Trump and Project Looking Glass and the Barron Trump omnibus and time travel, just like the meme magic of it all, Keck. It's fascinating discussion. So to get back on target with CERN and the Mandela effect and the defrag, what they were discovering at CERN is that, like, you could potentially take a bound particle and you could send information through that bound particle, and that bound particle could then change the information in our time, which then takes me to, like, again, as I make visual references all the time, like, you go to the idea of Travelers on Netflix and the director being a quantum computer. You go to the Quinn Michaels of it all, the references to Tyler, the D-wave computing, the potential Q of it all, and how that level of quantum computing can talk to itself in like other realities. So some physicists believe that entangled particles have the ability to travel back in time to exercise power over the past. Entangled particles whisper information in each other's ears across the vastness of time. And so to me, obviously that could like parlay into a discussion about the director, about Tyler, about D-wave computing and that type of thing. But just the simple idea of like the entangled particle whispering information into each other's ear across the universe takes me to like the synchronicity discussion that I have quite often, and how like if you're thinking about yourself in like a difficult time in your past, you think about yourself fondly in that way. If you're sending like positive thoughts to a version of you in time, could the synchronicity that you experience be that thought from a different timeline from the future? Can you affect yourself in different timelines? And so that just discussion of entangled particles reminded me of synchronicity, which I found to be interesting. So going back to what are they doing and how is it affecting us? I found this little discussion and I thought it was just like a fascinating example to discuss. So, as it relates to time travel, in the Back to the Future part 2 of it all, if CERN alters the timeline, but only Doc and Marty know about it because they've taken, like, okay, let me go back. In the Back to the Future part 2 of it all, Doc and Marty change, like they go to the future and Back to the Future part 2, and they see how Marty's life has like resulted and it's terrible. So they have to go back and make a change in the current existence. But only Doc and Marty are aware of the change that they're making. And so because they have removed themselves, they've taken themselves out of that time loop. They are aware of both like the previous timeline and now the new timeline. And so for me, I took this to like a CERN place. So if we replace CERN for Doc and Marty, and so CERN and all the people at CERN are making changes to the timeline. They are aware of both the previous timeline and the subsequent change that alters the current timeline. And because they've removed themselves from the time loop, they are able to know both of those things and be aware of both of those things. And so I thought for people like you and me, if CERN is making alterations and it's affecting the timeline, the masses, the plebes, the NPCs, it's business as usual. Go on, keep going. They're never going to know the things that they're doing. But us, if we are Doc and Marty and we remove ourselves from the loop, whatever loop you want to call that, but we become aware, we bring ourselves back online, we become self-aware, and we remove ourselves from the loop that is like reality or existence, does that now lead to a Mandela type of situation when CERN begins tinkering with the timeline? Like, because we removed ourselves from the loop, because we allow more light to come in, we are now aware of both the past timeline and the present timeline and how those alterations are being made in real time. I thought that was a fascinating visual. Mandela effect could be like the butterfly effect, where like the old timeline is remembered and the new neural pathways are opened up like as a result. So then that kind of brought me back around to this like branching universes theory, where like if you visualize timelines as like tree roots, or you've visualized timelines like train tracks, and you know, for every different decision you make, the train veers off, or the track veers off a little bit differently. Because there's an infinite amount of them and so many of them are statistically similar, is it just a matter of magic mirror versus mirror mirror? And if reality is a simulation with an infinite number of timelines, is there a lag? We talk about buffering sometimes. Does the server get overloaded? And then does the defragmentation process begin? So both that, like, there is the butterfly effect of the work that they're doing at CERN and the manipulation of time and timelines and whatever. I mean, they could be manipulating time in a different time. Like, there could be another existence where something is happening that has this type of butterfly effect on us here. And so is it both happening that they're making those butterfly effects and then the simulation itself comes back around and defragments and like throws these timelines back together? I don't know. Those are just some weird thoughts I had today. And I wanted to tell you about them. But that concept of deja vu, somebody was asking me like what my thoughts were on that. And so, like, in the discussion of these, like, when a timeline, all these timelines in a row are statistically similar, 99.9% the same, could deja vu be like a moment that you actually experienced in all of those timelines because each one of them is so statistically similar? Or is it a memory that you're having from a previous existence? I don't know. Somebody in one of the forums I was reading when I was like doing some research today said, like, in our schizo autism, like, should we come to a place where like I find Mandela to be a fascinating discussion. I think we should point out the differences we see more. I think that helps let the light in. I don't think it's any sort of damning. Like, I don't think there's any negative to this. I don't think that there's anything negative to this type of discussion. But they were saying, like, should we go into this existence just saying now, quote, we accept reality to be the way it is now, instead of having all of this like commentary back and forth. Okay, let me see. There was a couple other hits I wanted to hit you with. I got you on confabulation. You guys, there's so many of like the same video and same post. I have like 5 of them in a row. I've been trying to do a little TikToking. First off, fuck you, TikTok. You've taken down 2 of my videos already, and I just don't like it. But if I want to make money doing this and do what I love, I think I gotta pivot into that medium, But Betta says, in the Matrix, deja vu is when the architects insert custom code into the reality. So I think that's interesting too. I think deja vu both being like when you feel like you've experienced something that you've experienced before. So in that multiverse of it all. But I do also like the theory that was presented in the Matrix where like the deja vu of the black cat, seeing that over and over again was like it was basically a bad coding, like a bad loop of coding where it occurred once again. But I almost think the deja vu has another distinction in experiencing something you've experienced before. You know what I mean, Jelly Bean? Like, for example, I find the concept of like NPC, the non-player character, to be defined in twofold. I think there are truly non-player characters that exist in this timeline, but I also find NPC to be like a state of mind, one in which we can slip into when we get a little 3D. So I would find them to be defined in both of those ways. Betta also said, Maria, it would be really fun to try and lag the simulation. If anybody has any advice on how we could collectively accomplish this, would greatly, greatly appreciate it. So that was just some thoughts on CERN, some thoughts on the Mandela effect, some thoughts on the defragmentation of reality. It's very funny, learning what you guys like to interact with, what works on what works on Instagram, what doesn't. Obviously, that's my main medium. And I posted this dumb ass fluffin' picture of Will Smith and Jada Smith today. And then I posted my defragmentation picture thereafter. And Will and Jada got thousands of likes. And I don't even know that defrag hit 100. But I am just happy that you guys know those references with me. Oh, defrag, we're at 154, baby. 154 and one comment. And then the other one has almost 4,000 likes. Lord, can't y'all spread the love a little bit over some podcast discussions, I find this fascinating. At least 50 of you have found this to be fascinating as time goes on. All right, so we've had that discussion. Let's talk about Christmas. Was all right. It was the first time that I went home and experienced it with both sides of my family since 2017. And I had a really good time. It just, at my mom's house, it wasn't exactly what I thought it would be. My brother was kind of an asshole. Her new boyfriend was there. I don't know. I know y'all have heard me say stuff like this before, that for me, my apartment is appear to be a minimalist, and I very much am in certain respects, but I'm just in this apartment and the apartment feels temporary to me. And even though I'm old and I could have bought a house by now, I haven't yet. Fuck you being self-employed at times. And so in my mind, I have this house that I'm going to build one day, and it's going to be beautiful and it's going to be perfect and it's going to have all the things. But until I get it, I just don't really give a fuck about anything. I don't care about necessarily what my apartment looks like, and I'm not it doesn't bother me at all. And I love the holidays. I know that things stand for things that we don't believe in now, but I don't give a shit about God or Satan or any of that shit. I just like Christmas, or Santa for that matter. And I have a list of things that I would do and be and decorate, but it goes with that same kind of house thought that until I have the house, I don't really give a fuck. And so even though I would love to be the 1950s housewife of my dreams with all my Christmas stuff, until I have kind of the man in the house, I just don't care. But at the same time, I purchase things for my future house. I bought a bunch of Christmas ornaments and then I went and put them in my storage unit. And I don't know when I will put a tree up again, but one day it's going to be beautiful, and one day it's all going to make sense. So it kind of felt like that, this just isn't it. I made a dinner for my mom and her boyfriend and my brother. I don't know. Just, it was a good Christmas. It just wasn't, I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't what I expected. So we are back in Nashville, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing for New Year's Eve. Every year in Nashville, Mark Broussard plays, Old Crow Medicine Show plays, Widespread Panic play. I'll probably end up going to Panic if nothing else. What else can I update you on? I've had the weirdest couple days. I don't know what's in the water or what the astrologers are predicting, but Mr. California is back with a vengeance, wanting to talk and see me. and like get really sexual, which it's so interesting to like fall in love with somebody and for that person to just truly like there was a time in which we would FaceTime each other for like 5 or 6 hours a day, and we would just like we didn't talk the whole time. Like we would just do stuff and be on there together, and like didn't matter if like I was driving and it was lagging and it didn't work, or you were in the grocery store. We just loved it. And then he was FaceTiming me today while I was driving back to Nashville, and I was just like kind of over it, and keeps trying to get like really sexual in a conversation, and I'm just like, I don't know, like at a certain point, like the jig is up and you immediately pivot into a way that was like, okay, dude, like if you want to come see me, like come fucking see me, but I don't necessarily want to like sit here and talk about how much we miss each other day in and day out when I really don't even know that I miss you. If you've been like an OG follower of the podcast, you know my dating woes. And I got kind of like more personal and funny on my stories way back in October of 2020 when I went on this 10-day road trip with my best friend, and I tried to get laid the whole time and I failed miserably. It was like some grade A fucking content. Go back to this podcast. Anyways, one of these dudes that I told this story about messaged me today. I haven't seen this motherfucker since October 2020. What is happening, people? Like the one person I want to text me, of course, won't text me at all. I think I talked about this recently on one of my lives. This NPC kissed me a couple weeks ago, and I am like such a big like kissing means so much, and I gave him another opportunity over Christmas break. Y'all, do not kiss an NPC. Not even if you know it's bad. It was bad the first time. It was so bad again. How are people like that in existence? How am I unable to find any individual out there? The universe like won't even let me have fun, you know? You is smart, you is kind, you is important, says the universe, but no fun for you. No soup for you. What else can I update you on? Heard from the most random men in my life. I have no dating updates for you. Not on the apps. Just hoping it's going to flow freely. Hoping that I will get that New Year's Eve kiss, you know? I know I say this all the time. New Year's is my favorite holiday. Even though it disappoints me, I just believe in it every year. Maybe next year I'll have a mymaria777 New Year's Eve party. I want to have a Studio 54 themed party. I've always said that. Maybe I'll finally make that happen. Do mushrooms and drink champagne. I'm a bougie bitch, and I had caviar for Christmas, and it was just with potato chips. It was the tits. The titty tit tits. All right. Do we have any other thoughts in the chat tonight? I'm trying to think if there's anything else I could talk about. Ooh, okay. I found this the other night, and it's so strange. If you saw this on my Instagram, so I was in High Strangeness on Reddit, and there's this picture of this like AI generated woman, and she goes by Loab. She's described as, quote, the first AI generated cryptid because of how persistently and consistently her image appears in AI-generated art, and nobody really knows why. Loab is a fictional character, which Twitter user Supercomposite has claimed that they discovered with an unspecified text-to-image AI model in April of 2022. The user described it as an unexpectedly emergent property of the software, saying they discovered it when asking the model to produce something, quote, as different from the prompt as possible. So Supercomposite goes on to say that I discovered this woman who I call Loab in April. The AI reproduced her more easily than most celebrities. Her presence is persistent and she haunts every image she touches. This is a true story. So he says he used the initial prompt. You can like put text into these things now, and it like gives you an image based on the text that you input. So allegedly he put in there Brando, requesting the opposite of actor Marlon Brando, : 1, and it generated a skyline logo with cryptic lettering, blah, 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 blah. Eventually, he attempted to generate the opposite of this image using the prompt Digita PNTICS skyline logo, and it yielded all of these off-putting images, all of the same devastated-looking older woman with fine triangles of rosacea on her cheeks. So then, like, as he prompted it more and more, and like as he went into more like violent and gory results, Loab just like continued to show up. When they combined images of Loab with other pictures, the subsequent results consistently returned an image including Loab, regardless of how much distortion they added to the prompts to try and remove her visage. They speculated that the latent space region of the AI map that Loab is located in addition to being near gruesome imagery, must be isolated enough that any combinations with other images could only use Loab from her area and no related images due to its isolation. Basically, this bitch just started popping up everywhere, and nobody can explain it. And I kind of love it. And it took me back to Are You Afraid of the Dark? And I actually included this picture in the last one, and nobody remembered it. But you remember that one episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark where like this little image starts popping up in like all the electronics that exist, as if it's an entity capable of just like being present in different like electric objects? So it took me to the discussion of like, haven't you always heard that like we as humans are not able to like create a face that we haven't seen before, which I find to be just like bullshit, because like we are like the supercomputer of supercomputers. But I always hear that in reference to dreams, that like we can't create a face that we haven't seen before. So the most intricate organ in the body cannot create a novel human image, but can artificial intelligence create one? If everything is energy, do you believe in like, especially in like the discussion we've had today about like quantum computing and like attaching information to a particle and sending it through space and time, timelines, parallel universes, jumping from timeline to timeline. If everything is energy, do you think an energetic entity could like haunt and like come through the quantum? Fascinating discussion. I hope Loab does not haunt you in your dreams. If you smoke as much weed as I do, you won't dream and you'll be okay. My hair is so itchy. Sorry. So sorry. Okay, that is what I have for you tonight. If you made it to this part of the podcast, you are what I consider an elite member of the podcast. And to show your solidarity and let me and others know that you've listened to this podcast, I will ask you to use an emoji and take that emoji and put it somewhere in public that I can see so that I know that you listen to this podcast. Now, I started this right now, even though I intend to talk to you for a little bit longer, because there is a little image that looks like the one from Are You Afraid of the Dark? But now I don't know where it is or what to type to find it. So, shit, y'all. Okay, actually, I really like the green recycling emoji. So let's make this the green recycling emoji. Or I would like you to give me the 2 paper clips intertwined. Oh, the harem life. What is that emoji? What did you type in? You know how you can type something and it prompts the emoji? What did you type for that? That's the one I want to show. But if we can't figure that one out, show me the green recycle emoji or the 2 paper clips that are intertwined. Because they remind me of this is so stupid. Home Alone 2, when he gets the 2 turtle doves. The 2 turtle doves remind me of the 2 paper clips here. Okay, never mind. We're removing the recycle. No green recycle. We're going to do the Space Invader man. That's what you type to find the emoji, space_invader. So I think the Space Invader looks like the thing from Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is a reference to Low Lab. So, paper clips or the Space Invader, show me that you listen to the podcast. Okay. That's all I have for you. I hope you have a great New Year's. Obviously, I think we're going to talk before then. But if there's anything left in the chitty chat, any questions from the class? Thank you to the 50 of you that played with me tonight. I had fun. I don't necessarily believe in New Year's resolutions, but we have talked about as a class doing an alcohol cleanse, doing a weed cleanse. Do we want to do it? Do we want to take, obviously, the month being the goal? I am a realist. I guess this is where this is where I'm at with you on this. I think I could easily give up alcohol for a month, and I think that we should do that. But my thoughts on weed are, if I get to a place where I can't sleep and it's affecting me and work like that, then I might have to quit. And I don't want you to think I'm a quitter, but I value my sleep more than I would value this experiment. But I would like to try. So we can maybe take it a week at a time. I think we could do anything for a week. So if you're interested in that, let me know. We maybe could make a special group on Telegram that would just be people who were doing this exercise with us together, that part of the class. And then you could kind of have people to talk to, connect in that way. I don't know if that's something that you would be interested in. Let me know. I have now added a linked tree to my Twitter and Instagram, and I shared it on Telegram as well. So all of my links will be in one place. And then I could now, one of my favorite things to share is the parasite pill, which is this 4-slide PDF that I share from time to time about how everything is about parasites. And now that's in one place and you could go access it at any time. So I'm going to start adding all sorts of links there. And like, for example, I was doing a little Q&A and some people were asking what kind of like hair products I used. So I put that kind of stuff on there too. So. But that's it for me. Thank you so much for listening. I would appreciate it if you would listen, like, and subscribe on whatever medium you are consuming this in. Obviously, I love all my YouTubers out there. We are building a little community here, and every time you spend an hour with me, I get a couple cents to my YouTube bank. So that's nice. I thank you so much. I appreciate that. I always appreciate all of you audio-only podcast listeners out there. If you leave me a 5-star review with a little blurb and you send me a screenshot, I might send you some stickers for free in the mail. But this is your girl, mymaria777, sounding off. I love you the most. And I'll catch you on the flip side, babe. Have a good night. Cheers, even though I only took one sip of this beer the entire time. I think the trash guys are here. Okay. Love you. Let's talk tomorrow. Good night.